This is an asynchronous recording of the June 2025 Stakeholder Engagement Sessions on Best Practices for Social Studies Instruction Guest Speakers Panel. This presentation, held originally on June 11th and 12th, 2025, included guest speakers from Richardson ISD and Lamar Consolidated ISD, in coordination with the Social Studies team from the TEA Division of Curriculum Standards and Student Support. Members of the Reading Language Arts and Social Studies team in the Curriculum Standards and Student Support Division are led by Jim Doris and include Tim Bryant, myself, Jenny Gauna, Tamara Robert, and Giomar Andujar. The agenda for this presentation began with an overview of the protocols and goals of stakeholder engagement sessions. The main focus of the presentation was to share best practices for social studies instruction. District panelists shared their research and curriculum actions taken to support quality instruction for students. And during the live event, we provided opportunities for participants to share their feedback with the district panelists and ask questions. If you have questions, you may contact TEA staff through the email addresses included in the presentation, or later on, a link to the help desk will be given for use in submitting questions. And with an overview of stakeholder sessions in general. Sessions because TEA is committed to enhancing opportunities for stakeholder engagement. In these sessions, we share information related to social studies and reading language arts, provide opportunities for general questions, facilitate discussions, and collect feedback from stakeholders. Access past stakeholder engagement sessions on our TEA Social Studies webpage under the Recent Social Studies Communications section. The next section of the presentation will focus on best practices for social studies instruction. Carlene Jolly from Richardson ISD will be our first district panelist, providing information, followed by Lisa Kale and Brittany Scammerhorn from Lamar Consolidated ISD.
Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share our findings with everyone else in the state. I'm Carlene Jolly. I am in Richardson ISD, which is a suburb of Dallas, and I am the elementary social studies specialist. And I'm going to take you on the journey that I've been through the last few years. I had taught everything from pre-K through second grade, and then in 2010 I moved to 6th grade and was teaching RLA, science, and social studies all at the same time. And I started to notice a pattern in the STAR reading passages. As you can see here, we have Bangladesh and monsoons and westward expansion, the pyramids of Egypt, World War II, the Cold War, George Washington, Venezuela, and in Lindbergh, and lots of maps. So I began to realize that many of the STAR passages were related to social studies content and included social studies vocabulary. So I'm going to take you on a journey with me of some of the research that I conducted and then some of the observations that I have made. These are not from TEA and they're not from Richardson ISD. This is just kind of my passion project. So in my research, I found an infographic on the marginalization of social studies. And this little pie chart here gives us an average breakdown of the time spent on different subjects in elementary school. And some of us know that, and it's obvious that science and social studies get a little bit less of the time, and social studies sometimes probably gets even less time than what is conveyed in that chart. We also, on that infographic, have a statistics of second graders who had 60 lessons of literacy-rich social studies instruction scored 23% higher on reading assessments. I like to look at this in a couple of ways. If I look at the data of my students and the data of our district and just overall data, many of our students who fall short would have a lot more success if they scored 23% higher on reading assessments. And I also like to think of it maybe not being as just second graders. Maybe we could put 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, English 1, English 2 in there, and maybe it would also boost their scores a bit. This is another piece of research that I came across, which is pretty astounding. Fordham Research followed students from K through 5th grade, that there's, as we've already seen, there's more time spent on ELA, ELAR, RLA, reading, whatever we want to call it at the moment. So let's not get hung up on the different acronyms for reading instruction. A clear, positive, and statistically significant effect on reading improvement is associated with increased time spent on social studies. It compared science, reading, math, and RLA, and how the time spent on each one impacted reading improvement. The next bullet, though, says that no correlation was found between time spent on English language arts and reading gains. So there again, there's links provided if you would like to go dig into that research. It is pretty fascinating and goes into great depth. So with the STAR redesign that happened just a few years ago, TEA said that they were going to make efforts to build students' background knowledge, that they were going to prioritize cross-curricular passages in RLA that reference topics that students have learned about in other classes. I really kind of like that. As a social studies person, I was hoping that social studies would be there, but I really liked that it was going to be intentionally taking cross-curricular material from that grade level and things that students may have learned maybe in the previous grade level as well. So as I had found from 2013 to 2019, about 92% of the 3rd through 6th grade passages had already had social studies content or vocabulary. If I looked at English from 7th grade to English 2, it was about 97 to 98% had social studies content or vocabulary. So, but now they're going to prioritize and intentionally make it cross-curricular and for that grade level, because as you notice in the samples before, for the 6th grade, there were some that were really kind of 5th grade with the westward expansion and some of that. So this set me on another journey to then start digging even deeper into the STAR reading passages to analyze them for social studies content. And you get to see some of that data. And these are just my observations. It's not done by TEA or anyone in the state or even anyone in Richardson. It's just me going in and looking for content and vocabulary in reading passages for 3rd through English 2 for 2023 on the next few slides. So here is where I wound up. I started reading all of the STAR passages for all the grade levels, 3rd grade through English 2, and I looked not only at the content, social studies versus science versus math versus other, whether it be fine arts or specials classes or other areas where the students do have TEKS in school. But I also looked at the genre. And as we know, we can all have little interpretations about the genre, so we're not going to get hung up on it. I just did the best I could at the moment as I was reading all these passages and just kind of set up a table of the title, what genre I thought it was, and if it contained some social studies content or vocabulary. So as you can see here, it's not just informational, and social studies is very well represented in these different selections. Here we continue on with 5th and 6th grade, and we have the same pattern. All of these contain social studies content or vocabulary, and we still have, regardless of the genre, we have some social studies content and a lot of science content. And again, some of the fine arts or specials classes. Let's give you a second just to soak that in. And the pattern continues. Here's 7th, 8th grade from 2023 with the cross-curricular content with the genres. You see some drama and poetry, informational, persuasive, fiction, paired selections. All of it has, or most of it, the majority for sure, has social studies content. And we'll see the same when we get into high school with English 1 and English 2. We see a lot of social studies content, a lot of science content, and again, all the different genres are represented in this. So it's not just informational passages. We can do our integration and our teaching and our building of those literacy-rich social studies lessons through any genre, not just when we're doing our informational focus. And all grade levels. It's not just K through 3 that needs that literacy rich, but it's all grade levels they need the literacy-rich social studies content. So how does this impact our students in Richardson ISD? We are a very diverse district. We're usually about 5th or 6th in the state as one of the most diverse. We have approximately 37,000 students, of which 12,000 or more are emergent bilinguals, and we have more than 76 languages represented in our schools. So how does this impact our students, and what can we do to help all? This is a study that has been passed around quite a bit, and in fact, TEA did use this as an example when they were showing the cross-curricular connections and how they were going to prioritize that in STAR passages. I have taken the liberty to change colors and some of the things, some of the graphics, but it's the baseball study. And so when we look at a very complex passage about baseball, which students are going to score better? Those with high reading ability or high knowledge of baseball? So with a first look at this, we probably know that the ones in the green section with the high reading ability and the high knowledge of baseball will most likely do the best. So who do you think, which group do you think will score the lowest? I think when we look at low reading ability, low knowledge of baseball, we can probably take that. So who's going to be second best? Let's find out. So this graphic shows us which groups of students scored, how they scored on this. So as predicted, the green group scored the highest and the purple group scored the lowest. But when we look at the two middle sections, is it the low reading ability or the high reading ability or the high knowledge or the low knowledge? Which is going to really create success and help all students be successful on the reading test? And it is the orange section, the low reading ability with high knowledge. So even if you have a high reading ability, but you don't have that background knowledge or that schema, you will not be able to perform as high. So this is like, oh, so how can we level the playing field for our students in Richardson ISD? So after looking at all of the STAR passages and looking at all the data and looking at our students in our district and that are also reflective of many students throughout the state, I decided to dig into TELPAS testing and to see how this information and how social studies might impact TELPAS for our emergent bilingual students. So at the top of each of these slides, you'll see the year of TELPAS and the grade level band. So this one is from 4th and 5th grade. The question is at the top, and then social studies TEKS that align to that question are at the bottom. And right off the bat, you can see Texas and government and 3 branches and legislative, executive, judicial. So this is straight from social studies TEKS with all that content and that vocabulary. This is a fill in the blank through multiple choice where students have to know that each branch has its own job. But if students have not been exposed to this vocabulary or this content, this question might be a little bit challenging. So this question is for a 2nd and 3rd grade banded question. And during social studies today, a teacher drew these pictures of landforms. Tell what you see on the chart, choose 2 landforms to describe, and write about landforms you have seen where you live or where you would go on a trip. So that is heavy in social studies. There's also some science in there, and this is covered in many grade levels of TEKS, but the students have to write on this question. So here's another question from 2023 TELPAS for 2nd and 3rd grade, and again we see those critical vocabulary words of economy, producers and consumers, money, and then the TEKS below it. This again is a multiple choice fill in the blank, but students have to be familiar with these concepts, content, and vocabulary to be successful. So this is the last question we're going to look at from TELPAS. This is from the 2020 6th and 7th grade TELPAS. I'm going to give you a minute to look at this one. This was very in-depth, and having taught 6th grade, this is a bit overwhelming. I really would have specifically had to teach these social studies TEKS to the rigor of the TEKS for students to be successful. So I'll let you look at this for a minute. So some of the things that we have adopted in Richardson ISD for elementary social studies or instructional implications that we found are in each of our elementary planning and pacing tools. We have added writing prompts. We also have a section called RLA Connections, where we might have a trade book or a book from one of our adoptions, such as Benchmark, or something from Pebble Go, or just one of the other things that we use in our school that relate to social studies. We've included some graphic organizers and different activities specifically with some of those. We have ideas for literacy stations. So one of our teachers added conversation stations for kindergarten and first grade. Any kind of books, library books from the RLA adoption, things from the classroom library. We also have added reading strategies, and we use a variety of genres in that section so teachers can see how social studies is connected through all genres. Here's an example of one resource that we built. We used a poem from Paired Selection from the 2014 6th grade STAR and put this in 5th grade because it's about westward expansion. And the first part of the poem is about traveling on an airplane and what you would see and experience traveling on an airplane from east to west across the United States. And then the second half is about what your experience would be traveling in a covered wagon. And so as the RLA TEKS talk about, students visualizing and illustrating what they're reading, and to help support our students in building that skill, we pulled clip art, little pictures where students can match those pictures to stanzas, and to help them learn how to visualize. Of course, you can differentiate this and have some students go ahead and sketch their own illustrations. And then we have a section for annotations. So after students work on that, annotating each of the stanzas of the poem, they can write. They can write about and do a T-chart of what the experience was on the airplane versus the experience on the wagon, and then explain which you would rather do, which way you would rather travel west. They could explain reasons and provide text evidence. So that ties in some of the writing and providing text evidence. So the second part of this activity, it's more than one day, obviously, but it really digs into literacy and social studies. We'll look more on the next slide. So here is are some other things that we added that dig into RLA skills and westward expansion. The section of pictures on the left is just an open sort where groups of students would get the pictures. They get to look at them and determine how they would sort the pictures. Of course, they're all going to do black and white pictures versus colored, and so we try to get beyond that and have them really look at what was the author's purpose in these different paintings. So they usually get to the point where it's like some of the painters wanted to create something that looked very peaceful and like an easy trip, a wonderful family experience, where others wanted to show the challenges and obstacles that the people traveling west faced. And then students could write about the author's purpose and what evidence they saw, or select one of those pictures to analyze. We also use the traditional GAST, Manifest Destiny, where you could do quartering, where different groups get together until they find the match and describe the different perspectives in it. Or you could have speech bubbles and the students write about which the different people, characters, and things in the painting the perspectives that they would have or what they might be saying. And then we have an informational passage where students annotate, and that kind of ties all of this together into what the students are to learn about the westward expansion of the United States. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that this is helpful to you all, and it gets your brains kind of going on the journey that mine has been going on. And next up, we have Lisa and Brittany from Lamar Consolidated ISD, and wait till you see the amazing things that they have done with this idea in their district.
Hello, this is Lisa Kale from Lamar Consolidated Independent School District. I'm the K-12 Social Studies Coordinator, and I'll be joined by Brittany Scammerhorn, who is our Elementary Social Studies Content Specialist from Lamar Consolidated Independent School District. Today we want to talk about some connections between the RLA assessment and social studies content TEKS, as well as share with you some of the struggles that our district has had and how we have made some adjustments to address those struggles. Before jumping into the RLA and social studies alignment information, I want to tell you a little bit about our school district, Lamar Consolidated Independent School District, as this is going to help explain some of the struggles that we faced and then some of the adjustments that we made within our district. Currently, Lamar Consolidated is one of the fastest growing school districts in the state of Texas, with our current enrollment just over 47,000 students. To be considered a fast growing school district, you have to have 300 new homes annually. And right now we have 3 areas within our district that have 300 new homes being added annually, with one of those 3 areas having over 700 new homes being added annually. So we are looking at, between the next 15 and 20 years, our district is being projected to add about 2,100 students each year. And currently we have 7 high schools, which are 9th through 12th grade. We have 7 junior highs, which are 7th through 8th grade. We have 7 middle schools, which are 6th grade only, and we have 35 elementary schools. We also have several special sites, like an early childhood center, 1621. We have an alternative learning center, Fort Bend County Alternative School. We have a juvenile detention center and a career and technology center that's under construction. Those special sites serve all of the high schools, junior highs, middle schools, and elementary schools in our district. We are looking to open even more schools next year, and we have, to serve all of the schools, we have 1 K through 12 social studies coordinator, 1 elementary content specialist for social studies, and 1 secondary content specialist for social studies. So part of the reason why I share that is because many of our social studies coordinators are in the same boat. You have a very lean staff at the district level serving many schools within a district. Before jumping into the connections with the RLA assessment and the social studies standards, I want to give you a little background information on our Y and LCISD, and then some of the adjustments that we made because of some of the struggles that we've had. So when the STAR redesign was rolled out, LCISD had 1 social studies coordinator, and we had only 1 secondary elementary content specialist at the time. And so what we did is looked at how was social studies being taught across the district. And we looked at our elementary schools. Was there designated social studies time being taught in our elementary schools? And what did that instruction look like? Was it cross-curricular? Was it rushed at the end of the day? How many minutes were they spending on elementary? We also looked in secondary classrooms and looked at how were they teaching social studies? Were they using primary and secondary sources to help kids glean information about social studies? Some of the adjustments that we made was hiring an elementary content specialist for social studies, and that's Brittany Scammerhorn, who you're going to hear from later in the presentation. She works with instructional coaches that are on campus as well as teachers. She helps them utilize district resources that we have, and she shows them how to fit those district resources into the designated time for social studies. Things like Social Studies Weekly and STAVIS. A little side note on that is not TEA advocating for any of those resources. That's just what our district has purchased and used. We've also partnered with other content areas. We really started off partnering with ELAR in the beginning heavy, and then I've also included math and science, especially when our content has areas that overlap and connect, like in math with personal financial literacy and economics. In elementary school, those overlap, and those are easy cross-curricular opportunities. Also the same for science when you're teaching about geography and then the Earth's materials. Those are some easy content areas or areas in the content that allow for that cross-curricular integration. We looked at how many minutes were included daily in the daily instruction of the elementary schedule, and our coordinators had gotten together and talked about that time and suggested a 30-minute chunk of the day in the elementary schedule to be designated for social studies instruction specifically. And then we also used resources. Like I said, some of the resources that you're going to hear Brittany talk about is Social Studies Weekly and SAVIS. But how we use those resources to address the STAR redesign and cross-curricular instruction. So now we're going to look at the 5th grade RLA 2024 released test, and we're going to look at RLA information, which is the paired selection. That is going to be an informational text as well as a some poetry. And for my RLA or ELAR people, I come from a social studies world, so I apologize now if I get some of my terms mixed up and I say paired passages or call it something that's a little bit different than what you're used to, so I'll apologize now. But anyways, we're going to look at the social studies content that is in the paired selection, and then we're also going to look at the social studies strands. So what you're looking at currently on the screen are social studies strands that are color-coded, and we're going to connect the content that is in the RLA passage, in both the informational passage and the poetry. We're going to look at how they connect with the social studies content strands. So you're going to see one of two things on the screen with that RLA passage. You're going to see the key that's down below that's just highlighted with the history as being orange, geography green, blue economic, that purple color for science, technology, and society, or the social studies skills in yellow, or you will see the actual strands listed out, the TEKS listed out with the strands on each one of the passages. So this is the informational passage from the 5th grade 2024 RLA assessment. And this is the informational passage, and you can see the passage as a whole on the screen. And you know, the highlighting of the text does not represent TEA's judgment. This represents what I feel like is alignment from the RLA content and the social studies strands. You may feel like one thing needs to be highlighted or less needs to be highlighted. The overall point that I'm wanting to bring your attention to is you can start to see the color coding in the passage and how much of the content aligns with the social studies standards. And we're going to take a deeper look into this passage. So this is the first part of the passage, and I want to bring your attention to that magenta or that purple color in paragraph 3. It says, for 6 years, people have been building a railroad that would connect the two coasts of the United States. It was called the first transcontinental railroad. It was probably as important as the invention of cell phones. So if I stop there and then I go to the TEKS and I look at 22B, it says, identify how scientific discoveries, technological innovations, and the rapid growth of technology industries have advanced the economic development of the United States, including the Transcontinental Railroad. So if you're looking at paragraph 3 and you're looking at TEK number 22B, you can see that there's clear alignment there. It is even as specific as including the Transcontinental Railroad. And how that has been such an important or significant technological innovation and the growth of that technology. It also explains how the technological innovation was in the field of transportation and how it's benefiting individuals and society in the United States. I'm going to jump down to another example, and we're going to look at the green geography strand. In paragraph 8, it says the railroad workers also faced physical challenges. Difficult terrain, such as mountains, blocked the path. The workers had to tunnel through the mountains by blowing up a rock. So then if I go and look at the TEKS and the geography strands, I can see 8A, describe how and why people have adapted to and modified their environment in the United States, such as the use of human resources to meet basic needs. So you're looking at the way people adapted or modified their environment there when you're looking at the difficult terrains with the mountains and how the path was blocked and how they had to dig through the tunnels, dig through the mountains by blowing up the rock. And my point in highlighting this and showing you these two examples is if students aren't learning social studies in their daily instructional minutes, then they're going to be at a disadvantage when they're reading the RLA passage. Like Carlene Jolly pointed out earlier with the Mastery of Comprehension study, it's going to show you if students have had social studies instruction to build up that foundation, this is going to be easier for them to comprehend. And so it's just to show the disadvantage if students aren't getting that daily instruction social studies, or the advantage that they can have if they are receiving social studies instruction. This is the second portion of the informational text, and the example that I want to point out on this page or this slide is the use of primary and secondary sources. So if I'm looking at that yellow that's highlighted and I go down to the social studies skills and I look at 23A, differentiate between, locate, and use valid primary and secondary sources, such as technology, interviews, biographies, oral, print, and visual material, documents, and artifacts to acquire information about the United States. Well, they're including a primary source about technology within this passage, and if students aren't using primary and secondary sources, or they've never seen one, or they've never interacted with a primary and secondary source in social studies, they're going to be placed at a disadvantage when they get to their RLA test to understand why an author might have included that primary source. So I wanted to be able to point that out to you, and then you're going to see this later come up when you look at the questions that are on the RLA assessment. Now this is the second passage. This is the poetry piece, and you can see within the poetry piece, this is the whole passage that students have to read, and you can see that it is purple heavy. And again, this is not TEA's interpretation of this. This was mine. You may feel like that there needs to be more or less highlighted. My point was just to show you some of the things or some of the connections between the poetry and the social studies TEKS. And just like Carlene pointed out, not all of the content on the RLA that is aligned with social studies is informational text. You can see that here with this poetry passage. So if I'm looking at the first couple of stanzas, it talks about that I tap, type, click along the information superhighway. Any question that I have is answered in seconds. The peoples, places, or things of the whole world wide are connected by a web of wires and signals invisible to my unknowing eye. So if I go down and I look at the science, technology, and society strands again, I can see how scientific discoveries and technological innovations in the field of communication have benefited individuals and society. I can also see how the rapid growth of this technology has advanced the economic development of the United States. If I keep going, I can read more and more about how that technological advancement has developed in the United States, and I can see that connection between the TEKS and the RLA passage. I've also pulled a few of the questions that go with the paired selection so that you're able to see the alignment between RLA and social studies. So this is one of the questions, and if you look at the question, it says, in this article, A Country Connected, what is most likely the author's purpose for using a cause and effect structure in the section, A Life-Changing Project? So if you're looking at that question, and I go down to the social studies skills and I look at 23A, 23C. Analyze information by applying absolute and relative chronology through sequencing, categorizing, identifying cause and effect relationships, comparing, contrasting, and so on. I can see that that is specifically tied to a social studies skill, cause and effect relationships. And if I have not been exposed as a student to understanding cause and effect, I'm going to be placed at a disadvantage, and it is in our social studies TEKS to be able to teach and identify those cause and effect relationships. And then if you look at the answer to explain the impact of the railroad on people who lived at the time, that to me, for my social studies people out there, that sounds like an answer that could have come off of the 8th grade or the U.S. history assessment. That is a social studies content answer. So let's look at another question. Now this question I included because it is specifically about that primary and secondary source. And again, if students aren't handling primary and secondary sources in their social studies classes, are they being placed at a disadvantage on the RLA assessment? So if I look at this question, what are the most likely reasons the author includes the photograph in the article, A Country Connected? That is going to be one of those social studies skills with a question. I can see in other 8th grade and U.S. history tests when they include primary and secondary sources, a lot of times they will ask why, let's say Abraham Lincoln or George Washington might have included certain information in one of their inaugural addresses, or they might have a photograph. I'm thinking of potentially like a poster from the home front on World War I or World War II, and what was the reason they would have, used this poster during wartime. Those are skills that students are going to pick up and learn how to use and look at and analyze information from primary and secondary sources in their social studies classes. And so it's asking you to select 2 answers on this question. And your answers are to emphasize the lasting impact of the completion of the railroad, and to show how the anniversary of the completion of the railroad was celebrated. So if you're looking at connecting with social studies information, it's going to go back and connect to that science, technology, and society TEK. And then the last question I have to present is, which is the best summary of the poem, The World is at My Fingertips? I also wanted to show you where they're asking a question about a text that is tied to social studies that isn't necessarily informational. This one is over poetry. So you can see they're asking for a summary of it. And if I go down again, then I look at the social studies skills, it's going to talk about finding the main idea, summarizing, making generalizations, and this is asking for a summary of the poem. And then if I'm looking at the answer again, the answer is going to come from that science, technology, and society content, that alignment of that social studies content. So after looking at the questions, I want to remind you of some of the district adjustments that we made. We hired an elementary content specialist, and that is Brittany Skimmerhorn. You're getting ready to hear from her. And with that district level staff addition, she serves all 35 of our elementary campuses, and she works with the instructional coaches on campus as well as teachers. She has worked to help them understand how to take some of our district purchase resources, such as Studies Weekly, and fit them into 30-minute time chunks, or Savvas, and fit them into 30-minute time chunks that they have allotted for the day. She has also collaborated with other content areas whenever we have opportunities for that cross-curricular integration of instruction. And we have started with ELAR, and then we've also worked with math and science in any way that we can. One of the first things that our coordinators and content specialists did when we made some of these adjustments was we all looked at our scope and sequences K through 5, and we adjusted them for maximum opportunities for that cross-curricular integration. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about with our scope and sequences that we adjusted. In science, when science teachers are teaching about the earth and its materials, at the same time and in the same 9 weeks, they are also teaching about geography, both physical and human geography, so that they can maximize the opportunity that they have to be able to teach similar content, and so that they can naturally integrate it. Another one of the things that we looked at was partnering with RLA. So whenever they are teaching about informational text and research, that it aligns with our social studies content. So it may be that they're learning about historical figures at the same time they're doing research, so that they can research those historical figures. We also talked about daily instruction for social studies in the elementary schedule. We've carved out at least 30 minutes and gave suggestions of how to do that with a block schedule, or if you were a self-contained teacher in K through 5, so that there was dedicated daily instruction to social studies in the elementary schedule. And then we also used our resources to address the STAR redesign and cross-curricular instruction. Brittany is going to go over some of the things that she saw a need for and created using our social studies purchased resources for the district. And before she gets started, which I'm sure she's probably going to tell you about, but I also want to tell you, is that we would love to be able to share the resources in full that she has prepared and designed, but because of the fact that we are using portions of things that resources and materials that our district has purchased from things like Studies Weekly or Savvis, we're only able to show you a small portion of it and cannot share them due to copyright. But what she is going to share with you are some ECRs and paired selections. We talked about during STAR time, how can we support teachers and get them to teach social studies during that STAR review time. And one of the things that Brittany thought of that she's going to explain is the extended constructed responses and the paired selections. So you'll hear from her in the next few slides.
So one of the resources that we made here in Lamar CISD is our ECRs. Now this is a really easy way for us to work cross-curricular with RLA and social studies. And so this kind of came about based on data from STAR when for 4th grade, they had the writing assessment and the reading assessment, and they removed the writing assessment and they added writing to the reading assessment just to make it one RLA encompassing assessment. We noticed that the data for our ECRs were low in comparison to our reading standards, and that was for a variety of ways, such as the students not having exposure to those type of questions and teachers having exposures on how to teach those type of questions. And so this came about on our data. And it first was rolled out during our STAR review, and it was just a couple ECR selections that were based on what they were currently teaching in social studies, but formatted in a way that they can practice the ECR strategies and skills and kind of get the best of both worlds. This particular sample we used from Studies Weekly. We also used other samples from Savvis, and I even used AI generated passages and questions because those are the resources that we purchased as a district, so we wanted to get the most of them. So when this was created, I kind of took a snip of the selection, added a primary source so that it looks like it has text features just like the RLA assessment. And I sat down with our RLA department and the content specialists on that side and really reviewed what the format looks like and even what the questioning looks like on our side. And so this expanded the next year after that to begin with when we are teaching ECRs and extended constructed responses to our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. Then they also will have one for each of the units in social studies to be able to practice and show off those skills. After we did the ECRs, and we had so much good feedback from our teachers and students, and they really loved the cross-curricular connections, we've dived a little bit more into what kind of social studies are we seeing in these assessments. And I saw a lot of paired selections that had something to do with social studies, and being able to take 2 selections and be able to kind of cross-examine them, find what's similar, find what's different, look at common themes, And so this, again, started when we were doing a STAR review, and it's expanded into when we teach paired selections, but they would take a social studies standard such as the Wright brothers or the moon landing or space exploration or any social studies standard that you want to cover, that we can see kind of a similar theme in it, and then wrote questions based on that. Again, some of these selections came from our sources that we already purchased. So I know the Taking Flight with the Wright brothers, we purchased Studies Weekly, and so we used that purchased program to then add on to it so that they can teach the social studies part during social studies and then practice during ELAR, especially during their STAR review, during their workstations, during their independent work, just so they can see the connections between those two contents. Now that it's been over, I think we're going into our second year of really looking into cross-curricular connections in social studies and ELAR. Some of our results is that elementary teachers including social studies in their daily schedule. And so not always they were teaching social studies every day, but now they really are, because they see that importance during the RLA assessment, as well as just making those connections. More and more campuses and teachers are requesting social studies and cross-curricular support. So a lot of times I come out right with the content specialist for RLA to support our monolingual teachers and our bilingual teachers in campuses, and just so they can see the connection between the two. And those teachers are so open to using those resources during RLA instruction. So because it looks like RLA, such as the paired selections in the ECRs, they're willing to do it during their RLA time to reinforce those skills, meaning it opens up social studies time to allow for more content to be taught, more interactive lessons to be taught. And the best part is that it's broken down content silos. So we're no longer just social studies all by itself. They see the importance of it being embedded.
Following slides provide contact information for TEA staff and other divisions within TEA that may be of interest to stakeholders. If you have a question, please feel free to contact a member of the Social Studies TEA team. The email addresses of the team can be seen here. You can also access the TEA Social Studies webpage with the QR code on the left, submit a question to the Curriculum Help Desk via the QR code in the middle, or subscribe to the Social Studies newsletter using the QR code on the right. The Instructional Materials webpage for up-to-date information regarding instructional materials. Their Help Desk link is also seen here. You may also submit questions to the Assessment Help Desk using the QR code on the screen. Early childhood education resources are available through the QR code seen here. Use the link or QR code here to learn about the Texas Virtual School Network statewide catalog. TXVSN is a state-led online learning initiative that provides students and Texas schools access to quality online courses and instruction. Thank you for accessing this video of the June Stakeholder Engagement Session asynchronous recording of the Best Practices for Social Studies Instruction guest speakers panel held on June 11th and 12th, 2025.